1995, DEA agent Mark Vega left his El Paso office for an undercover operation and was never seen again. The investigators launched an extensive manhunt, but found nothing officially branding him a defector who had betrayed his country. Then, 8 years later, a rancher's son stumbled upon something buried in a gully. What investigators discovered would expose a conspiracy of silence that reached the highest levels of law enforcement and prove that some secrets are worth killing to protect. Eli Banner's boots skidded down the loose gravel as the jackrabbit disappeared into a tangle of mesquite. The rabbit's white tail flashed between the thorns, leading him deeper into the arroyo that cut through their ranch like a scar. Eli had never ventured this far east before. The gully twisted and narrowed, its walls rising higher with each step until the Texas sun became a bright slash overhead. He paused, listening. No rustle of movement, no telltale thump of rabbit feet on packed earth, just a whisper of wind through dry grass and the distant lowing of cattle. That's when the light caught it. A strip of chrome, maybe 6 inches long, jutted from the quiche. At an odd angle, Eli knelt and brushed away the loose dirt with his palm. More metal emerged, black paint, or what remained of it after years of burial. He dug faster, using his pocket knife to scrape away the hard pan. The bumper revealed itself inch by inch. License plate, bracket, tail lights. Their red plastic cracked and faded white. This wasn't some piece of ranch equipment that had broken off and been forgotten. This was a whole car buried in the middle of nowhere. Eli's hands shook as he cleared more dirt. From what he could now see was the rear quarter panel. Black paint showed through the rust and patches, and chrome trim ran along the side. He'd seen enough vintage cars at the county fair to recognize the lines. This was from the 80s, maybe early 90s. His phone had no signal this deep in the arroyo, so he marked the spot with his red bandana tied to a mesquite branch and ran the 2 miles back to the house. Dad, you gotta see this." Tom Banner looked up from the tractor engine he'd been cursing at for the better part of an hour. "Boy, unless you found gold." "I don't want to hear it. There's a car buried in the East Gully. A whole car. Dad been there for years." The wrench in Tom's hand stilled. He studied his son's face, dirt-streaked eyes bright with discovery. "Show me the drive to the gully." Took 5 minutes in Tom's pickup, bouncing over cattle guards and around washouts. Tom killed the engine, and they walked the last 100 yards in silence. Now that's not something you see every day. Tom's voice carried the weight of a man who'd lived through enough to recognize trouble when he saw it. "How deep you think it goes?" "Deep enough." Eli pointed to where the dirt had been disturbed by his digging. "I can see part of the trunk. We're calling the sheriff soon as we get back to the house." "What do you think happened?" "I mean, who buries a car?" "Someone who didn't want it." Found Sheriff Dale Haraway arrived 3 hours later with a 2-man crew and a backhoe that had seen better decades. By evening, they'd pulled a black 1984 Buick Regal from what amounted to a carefully constructed grave. The car sat in the dying light, like an accusation. Bullet holes starred the driver's side window and punched through the door. Panels blood-dried to the color of rust stained the bench seat, and floor mats in the glove compartment was a federal badge. Special Agent Mark Vega, Drug Enforcement Administration Haraway, held the badge up to his flashlight beam, thick fingers turning it over like he was examining a counterfeit bill. "I remember this guy went missing back in '95. Feds tore this county apart, looking for him." "What happened?" Tom Banner kept his distance as if proximity to the car might somehow implicate him in whatever had transpired here. Near as anyone could tell, he just vanished. No trace, no leads, nothing. Of course, the DEA swooped in faster than buzzards on roadkill, took over the whole investigation. Haraway's voice carried the particular bitterness of local law enforcement, pushed aside by federal agencies, claimed it was part of some bigger operation. Above my pay grade. They said the sheriff's radio crackled to life. He listened to the dispatcher's tiny voice, then keyed the mic. "Tell him we found Vega's car." "Yeah, the DEA agent from '95, and tell him to call the feds." This just became their headache. Again, the federal building in El Paso hummed with the particular energy of a bureaucracy. Disturbed from its routine, Special Agent Danny Reich sat in the conference room on the 3rd floor, watching Deputy Director Morrison shuffle through files that should have stayed buried with Mark Vega's car. "This is a cold case review, Agent." Reich, nothing more. Morrison's voice carried the flat authority of a man accustomed to having his pronouncements accepted without question. "The Bureau wants a fresh set of Eyes on the evidence, write your report file. It move on. Danny studied the photographs spread across the conference table. Crime scene shots of the Buick Regal and the badge that had somehow survived 8 years underground. Mark's badge, she'd seen him pin it to his jacket every morning for the 6 months they'd worked together. What about the original investigation? The case files classified above your clearance level. Morrison closed the manila folder with the decisive snap of a man ending a conversation. The operation Agent Vega was involved in intersected with ongoing federal initiatives. Some secrets need to stay secret, even from us. The words hit Danny like a slap. She'd been with the DEA for 12 years, had earned her clearance level through competence and dedication, and Morrison was treating her like a rookie fresh from Quantico. Sir, with respect, how am I supposed to conduct a meaningful review if you're supposed to look at what happened to the car Agent Reich, where it was found, how it got there? What the physical evidence tells us, you're not supposed to relitigate an investigation that was properly concluded 8 years ago. Morrison stood signaling the end of the briefing. One more thing. Morrison paused at the door. There are ongoing operations in that sector, delicate operations. Your investigation will not interfere with current federal initiatives in the region. Are we clear? Crystal, good, you have 2 weeks to write your report. Keep it simple, keep it clean, and don't stir up old ghosts. The door closed with the soft click of authority exercised. Why is Morrison trying to get Danny to enter investigation so hastily? Do you think he's hiding something? Comment below what truly happened to Mark Vega. Did he really betray his badge? Give this video a like and keep watching to find out. Also, let us know where you're tuning in from today. She'd worked with Mark Vega during the summer of 1994, 6 months before his disappearance. He'd been assigned as her training officer for Undercover operations, and despite the 12-year age difference, they'd developed the easy partnership of cops who understood each other's rhythms. He'd treated her like the little sister he never had, teaching her how to read a room, how to blend into backgrounds, how to recognize the subtle signs that an operation had gone sideways the last time she'd seen him. Mark had been worried, deeply, concerned about something he couldn't or wouldn't discuss. There's something dirty here, he told her during what turned out to be their final conversation. Something that goes deeper than any of us wanted to believe. 3 days later he was gone, but ghosts Danny had learned were notoriously difficult to bury, especially when they carried federal badges and knew where the bodies were hidden. She walked to her desk in the bullpen, past agents who avoided her eyes with the particular care of people who'd been warned not to get involved. Someone had taped a note to her monitor. Try not to disappear. Danny crumpled the note and dropped it in the trash. Then she opened her computer and began typing her request for access to the evidence files. Morrison had given her 2 weeks to write a simple, clean report. He hadn't said anything about conducting a simple, clean investigation. The drive to Marisol Vega's house took an hour. Marisol had moved 3 times since Mark's disappearance, each house a little smaller, a little farther from the federal building where her husband had reported for duty every morning. Danny parked her government sedan behind a 10-year-old Honda Civic and walked to the front door, conscious that she was crossing a threshold between her official investigation and something more personal. Marisol answered the door before Danny could knock, as if she'd been watching from the window. 8 years had added gray to her black hair and lines around her dark eyes, but she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that Danny remembered. Agent Reich. Marisol's voice held neither warmth nor hostility, just the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to trust federal agents bearing news. I heard they found his car. May I come in? Marisol stepped back, gesturing toward the living room. Danny noticed the details that spoke of a woman living in the shadow of an unsolved disappearance. Deadbolts on interior doors, curtains drawn tight, despite the early hour. A baseball bat leaning against the wall within easy reach. Can I get you coffee? Water. Coffee would be good. Marisol moved to the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had hosted too many federal agents over the years. Danny studied the photographs on the mantel mark in his DEA Academy graduation photo mark, and Marisol on their wedding day, Mark holding an infant. Where is your daughter's soccer practice? She'll be home in an hour. Marisol returned with 2 cups of coffee, black and strong. I prefer to have these conversations when she's not here. She asks too many questions I can't answer. What do you remember about the days before Mark disappeared? Marisol's laugh held no humor. I've answered that question for every federal agent, local detective, and private investigator who's knocked on my door for 8 years. The answer hasn't changed. Humor me, he was worried, more worried than I'd seen him since the early days when he was working narcotics in Miami. He'd stopped talking about his cases. Not that he ever said much, but usually I could tell when something was bothering him the last few weeks. It was like he was a completely different person. Danny sipped her coffee and waited. She'd learned that silence was often more effective than questions. He started checking the car for tracking devices every morning before he left for work. Every evening, when he came home, he'd crawl under the chassis with a flashlight, pop the hood, run his hands along the wheel. Wells, did he mention any specific concerns, problems with his cases, issues with other agents? He said there was a leak. Someone high up was feeding information to the people he was supposed to be investigating. But when I asked him who, he just shook his head, said the less I knew, the safer I'd be. Danny sat down her coffee cup. Did he leave anything, documents, recordings, anything that might? The FBI asked me that same question, so did the DEA investigators, so did the local police. I gave them everything, his home office, his files, his computer. They took it all and told me it was part of an ongoing investigation. That was 8 years ago. The bitterness in Marisol's voice was sharp, enough to cut glass. Danny recognized it as the particular anger of someone who'd been promised answers that never came, cooperation that turned into stonewalling justice that transformed into bureaucratic convenience. I want you to know that I'm going to find out what happened to him. Are you Marisol's dark eyes held the weight of 8 years of broken promises, or are you here to write another report that explains why the investigation has to remain classified, why the case files can't be released, why my daughter will grow up never knowing what happened to her father? Danny felt the accusation like a physical blow. She'd come here expecting to conduct a routine interview, part of the careful process of reviewing evidence and filing reports. Instead, she found herself confronting the human cost of bureaucratic secrecy. Mark was my training officer, she said quietly. He taught me how to do this job, how to read people, how to stay alive, how to tell the difference between good guys and bad guys when everyone's wearing the same uniform. Something shifted in Marisol's expression, a subtle softening around the eyes. I never believed Mark defected. Danny continued, not for 1 second. Whatever happened to him, wherever his car ended up buried. It wasn't because he betrayed his country or his badge. Mark Vega was one of the good guys. The good guys don't always win. Agent Reich, no, but sometimes they get. Even the forensics lab occupied the basement level of the federal building, its fluorescent lights casting everything in the harsh white of scientific objectivity. Dr. Sarah Mann looked up from her computer screen as Danny approached her, expression carrying the particular weariness of someone who'd spent too many hours staring at crime scene photographs. The blood work came back on the Vega car. Mann said without preamble. She'd known Danny long enough to skip the pleasantries. You're not going to like it. Danny pulled up a chair beside Mahan's workstation, where multiple monitors displayed DNA analysis charts and comparison tables. The familiar geometry of genetic markers filled the screens like abstract art, rendered in purpose. The blood on the passenger seat doesn't match Mark Vega's DNA profile. The words hit Danny with unexpected force. She'd been prepared for confirmation that Mark had died in the car, ready to begin the process of determining how and why the possibility that the blood belonged to someone else shifted the entire framework of her investigation. How certain are you, Absolute? I ran the comparison 3 times. The blood from the car belongs to an unknown male approximately 25 to 40 years old. Based on genetic markers, no match in any federal database. CODIS military records, federal employment screening. Whoever bled in that car was either very careful about staying off the government's radar, or he was foreign national. Makan swiveled in her chair to face Danny directly. But here's what's interesting. There are signs of a struggle. Defensive wounds indicated by blood spatter on the door handle and window. This wasn't an execution. It was a fight. Danny studied the crime scene photographs spread across Mann's desk. The bloodstains looked different, now less like the aftermath of Mark's murder, and more like evidence of a battle between 2 people. She didn't know what, about other evidence, fingerprints, fibers, anything that might tell us who else was in the car. Partial prints on the steering wheel and gear shift, but they're degraded after 8 years underground. I can tell you they don't match Vega's prints on file, but they're not clear enough for database comparison. However, we did find something interesting in the spare tire. Well, Mon reached for an evidence bag containing a small plastic card through the clear plastic. Danny could see a union membership card for the International Association of Mechanics and Related Workers, Local 247 Juarez, Mexico. The card belongs to a Roberto Sandoval, issued March 1994, expired status. He stopped paying dues in August 1995, 3 months after Vega disappeared. Any idea who? Sandoval was what his connection to Mark might have been. I ran the name through Customs and Border Protection records. Roberto Sandoval crossed the border regularly between 1993 and 1995, always at official checkpoints, always with proper documentation. He was employed by Guerrero Automotive in Juarez, which according to DEA intelligence files provided cover for various illegal operations. Danny felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with discovering an unexpected lead. The investigation was supposed to be simple. Determine how Mark's car ended up buried in West Texas. Write a report, close the file, but the evidence was telling a different story. The question now was whether Mark had been the killer, the victim, or something else entirely. The records division occupied an entire floor of the federal building, its walls lined with filing cabinets that held decades of federal investigations. Agent Patricia Morris had been the division's keeper for 23 years, long enough to develop the protective instincts of someone who guarded government secrets for a living. Vega Mark Anthony Special Agent Morris read from her computer screen without looking up at Danny case files transferred to classified status August 1995. Access restricted to level 5 clearance and above. What does that mean exactly? It means the files are stored in the sensitive compartmented information facility on the 7th floor, and you don't have the clearance to see them. Morse's tone suggested this was the end of the conversation. Danny leaned against the counter that separated the public area from the filing system. Through the bulletproof glass partition, she could see rows of metal cabinets stretching back into shadows like a library of secrets. Who ordered the transfer? Deputy Director Morrison on recommendation from the Joint Intelligence Committee. The files are classified as part of an ongoing federal investigation with national security implications. What kind of ongoing investigation? The man disappeared 8 years ago. Morris finally looked up her expression, carrying the particular patience of a bureaucrat, explaining obvious facts to dense civilians. Agent Reich, I don't ask questions, I just make sure they stay that way. If you want to appeal the classification status, you'll need to file a formal request with Internal Affairs and wait for approval from Washington. How long does that take? 8 to 12 months. What about witness statements, interviews with colleagues? Basic administrative records. Morris typed something into her computer, waited for the response, then shook her head. All transferred. That seems excessive for a missing agent investigation. Maybe Agent Vega was involved in something serious. Morris's voice carried the subtle warning of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions about classified operations. Danny's next stop was the personnel office where Agent Lisa Martinez managed staffing records. I can give you basic information, Martinez said, pulling up Mark's file on her computer. Employment, dates, training records, commendations, but any details about his assignments after 1994 are classified above my access level. Even routine assignment details, which cases he was working, who his partner was, what division he reported to classified. Actually, that's strange. According to the system, Mark Vega never officially left DEA employment. His status shows as temporary assignment location, classified. What does that mean? It means there is no investigation into his missing status, officially. He's not missing, he's just somewhere we can't talk about. Danny walked to the parking garage with a growing suspicion, but Mark's car had been buried with blood evidence and bullet holes, unless he was capable of being in 2 places, at once. Someone was lying about his official status. Her phone rang as she reached her sedan. The caller ID showed Dr. Mahan's extension agent, Rice. I have preliminary results on the additional blood work you need to see. What did you find? Chemical analysis shows traces of cocaine and methamphetamines in the blood sample. Anything else? Blood type is O negative, which is relatively uncommon. And I found something else in the samples. Traces of a prescription medication used to treat tuberculosis, very specific drug, not commonly prescribed in the United States, meaning the victim might have been foreign or receiving medical treatment outside normal U.S. healthcare systems. Agent Reich, I think your victim was someone operating outside official channels. Drug user possible, illegal immigrant. Danny drove toward home, checking her rearview mirror with the professional paranoia that Mark had taught her during those 6 months when he'd been preparing her for the dangerous ambiguities of undercover work. Always assume someone's watching. He told her, always assume they know more than you think they know, and always assume that the most dangerous person in any room is the one you trust completely. Now, 8 years later, she was beginning to understand what he'd meant. The VFW hall on the east side of El Paso smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke. Gil Tanner sat alone in a corner booth, nursing a glass of something amber and studying Danye's approach with the careful attention of someone who had learned to evaluate federal agents before they opened their mouths. "Agent?" "Reich." His voice carried the slight rasp of a lifetime smoker. "You said on the phone, this was about the Vega car." Gil Tanner had spent 32 years working customs at the Bridge of the Americas in border country. That was enough time to see everything humans were capable of doing to each other. "I understand you remember something about Mark Vega's disappearance." "I remember a lot of things about 1995, most of them I wish I could forget." Gil finished his drink and signaled the bartender for another, but the Vega situation, that one stuck with me, mainly because of what happened 2 days after he went missing. "Tell me about it." Black Buick Regal crossed, southbound, on October 15th, 1995, 2 days after Vega was reported missing. Diplomatic plates, DEA authorization codes, all the paperwork, perfect, but something felt wrong about it. Wrong how Gil's second drink arrived, and he took a careful sip before answering. Driver was nervous, young Mexican kid, maybe 25, sweating like he was smuggling explosives. Passenger was white, older, wearing a federal badge. "Did you get a good look at the passenger? Could you describe him?" 6't" tall, maybe 40 years old, gray at the temples. Gil reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook, its pages yellowed with age and covered in precise handwriting. "I kept records, personal records, you understand, things that didn't necessarily make it into official reports." He opened the notebook to a page dated May 15th, 1995, and turned it so Danny could read his careful notes. Buick Regal Texas plates covered by diplomatic insignia. Driver Manuel Santos. DO 03. NER 1270 Juarez address. Passenger Federal Agent Badge number 4517 operation. Code Phoenix operation. Code Phoenix. That's what he told me when I asked for identification, said it was a classified DEA operation, and the crossing was part of ongoing federal business. I filed a report with my supervisor, Danny, copied the badge number and operation code into her notebook. Badge number 414517 would be traceable through federal personnel records, assuming whoever owned it hadn't also been classified into bureaucratic obscurity. "What happened to your report? Disappeared faster than ice cream in August." My supervisor said it had been transferred to federal authorities for follow-up. That was 8 years ago, never heard another word about it. Gil closed his notebook and leaned back in the booth, studying Danny with the shrewd attention of someone who'd learned to read people's motivations. "Agent Reich, let me give you some advice from someone who's been watching the border longer than you've been alive. When federal agents cross into Mexico with diplomatic immunity 2 days after another, federal agent disappears. It's not a coincidence, it's a cleanup operation. Cleanup for whatever went wrong with whatever Mark Vega was really doing down here. And before you ask, yes, I think whatever happened to Vega was connected to that crossing. The driver was too nervous, the passenger was too careful, and the paperwork was too perfect. In my experience, when everything looks exactly right, that's usually when everything is completely wrong. Mr. Tanner, have you told anyone else about this crossing? Any other federal agents, investigators, journalists? You're the first person to ask about it since 1995. Makes me wonder why the DEA was suddenly interested in something that happened 8 years ago. We found the car buried in the desert near the Mexican border. Gil's expression shifted, the careful neutrality replaced by something harder. Then, someone went to considerable trouble to hide whatever happened, which means you're probably stirring up something that powerful people wanted to stay buried. He stood to leave, then paused beside their booth. "Agent Rice, I spent 3 decades watching bad people do bad things to good people. Most of the time, the good people were the ones who ended up buried. Be careful. You don't join them." Her phone rang as she was about to drive her away. The caller ID showed Deputy Director Morrison's direct line agent. "Rice, I need to see you in my office." "Now, sir, it's after hours." Now Agent Reich Danny knocked on Morrison's door. then entered without waiting for permission. Morrison sat behind his desk, studying a file that he closed as soon as she walked in. Agent Rice, I understand you've been conducting interviews without authorization? Sir, you assigned me to review the Vega case. I'm interviewing witnesses who have information relevant to your conducting a cold case review, not a full investigation. There is a difference. Morrison's voice carried the particular authority of someone delivering a warning disguised as a briefing. Some aspects of Agent Vega's disappearance intersect with ongoing federal operations that require discretion. Danny took the chair across from Morrison's desk, noting that he hadn't offered it to her. The power dynamics in the room were crystal clear. She was being managed, not consulted. What kind of ongoing operations? Classified operations. Agent Reich, the kind that don't benefit from federal agents interviewing retired customs officers and asking questions about diplomatic crossings. From 8 years ago, the implication hit home immediately. Morrison knew about her conversation with Gil Tanner, which meant someone had been monitoring her investigation from the beginning. Sir, with respect, how am I supposed to conduct any kind of meaningful review if I can't interview witnesses or access case files? You're supposed to focus on what we know, not what we don't know. We know Agent Vega's car was found buried in West Texas. We know there was blood evidence suggesting violence. We know the case was properly investigated in 1995 and classified for national security reasons. Your job is to confirm that the physical evidence is consistent with the original conclusions. And what were those conclusions? Morrison opened the file he'd been reading when she arrived. Though he kept it angled so she couldn't see the contents, Agent Vega was killed in the line of duty during a classified operation. His death was unfortunate, but not unexpected. Given the nature of his assignment, the case remains classified to protect ongoing federal initiatives and the safety of other agents working in similar capacities. What about the blood evidence? Dr. Mahon's analysis shows the victim in the car. Wasn't Agent Vega Morrison's expression didn't change, which told Danny he already knew about the forensics results. Agent Vega was involved in a violent altercation during his assignment. Other people were injured or killed. The blood evidence supports the conclusion that he died protecting his operation. Then where's his body? That information is classified. Agent Reich, the conversation had reached the bureaucratic equivalent of a steel wall. Morrison had answers, but he wasn't sharing them. The classification system had been used to bury not just Mark's case files, but any meaningful investigation into his disappearance. Danny stood to leave, then paused at Morrison's door. Sir, I knew Mark Vega. I worked with him. He wasn't the kind of agent who would disappear without a trace, unless something went seriously wrong with his operation. Agent Vega was a good agent. Danny, that's exactly why his death was such a loss to the DEA. But good agents sometimes die in bad situations. It's part of the job. We all signed up for. Danny left Morrison's office with certainty that this whole thing was a cover-up, and she's gonna find out who's behind it. Her phone rang as she pulled into her apartment complex. The caller ID showed Marisol Vega's number. Agent Reich. I've been thinking about our conversation. There's something else I need to show you. What is it? Let's meet tonight. If you're serious about finding out what happened to Mark, you need to hear what he said before he disappeared. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop near Marisol's house, a neutral location where two women drinking coffee would attract no attention from anyone who might be watching. Either of them, Marisol arrived first, choosing a table near the back where their conversation couldn't be overheard. She'd brought a small paper bag, which he placed on the table between them, like an offering. I didn't really trust you initially, but after all you've done, I think it's safe to show you this. I listened to it again before coming here. It's hard to hear his voice, but you need to understand what he knew before he died. I found this a few years ago while clearing out the attic. Danny opened the bag and found a micro cassette recorder. He made this recording 3 days before he vanished. I know because I remember that night he stayed up late in his office, said he was working on something important. The next morning he must have hid the recorder in Maria's music box. After you hear what's on that tape, you'll understand why I've been afraid to trust anyone in federal law enforcement, and why I think whoever killed my husband is still out there, still dangerous. They finished their coffee in silence. Two women bonded by their determination to honor the memory of a man who died trying to expose something worth killing. For Danny drove home with Mark's final testimony in her pocket, knowing that whatever he'd recorded would either solve his case or make her the next agent to disappear while investigating federal corruption. Danny sat in her apartment's kitchen with the micro cassette recorder on the table before her, a cup of coffee growing cold at her elbow. But the weight of what it contained made her hesitate. Before pressing play, Mark's voice filled her kitchen. Tinny through the small speaker. If anyone's listening to this, it means something happened to me. What I'm about to say will get me killed. If the wrong people hear it. I've been working Operation Code Phoenix for 8 months. Official mission, infiltrate the Guerrero trafficking network operating between Juarez and El Paso. Unofficial reality. Someone high up in the DEA has been using Phoenix as cover for their own operation. They're not disrupting the drug trade. They're controlling it. Someone in our chain of command has been allowing specific shipments through in exchange for intelligence on rival organizations. But they're not just taking information. They're taking money. Serious money enough to compromise everything we've been working for. Down here, I've documented dates, amounts, routes. Someone's been using federal resources to run product across the border. They've got local protection, federal cover, and enough political insulation to operate for years without detection. The problem is, I don't know how high this goes. What I do know is that I can't trust normal channels, can't trust anyone who might be part of the network. Mark's voice carried the strain of isolation. If something happens to me, if this tape gets found, tell Marisol I love her. Tell Maria her daddy died trying to make sure the good guys win. And to whoever's investigating this, be careful who you trust. The recording ended with a soft click of the stop button, leaving Danny alone in her kitchen with the weight of Mark's final words. Danny's phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed Gil Tanner's number. Agent Reich, you need to get out of there. Now what are you talking about? I've got friends who still work. Customs. Word came down through federal channels this evening. There's a bolo alert on you. Be on the lookout for a rogue DEA agent conducting an unauthorized investigation. Who issued the alert? Came from DEA headquarters, signed by Deputy Director Morrison. Danny felt the trap closing around her with bureaucratic efficiency. Morrison had warned her to stay within narrow boundaries, and when she'd pursued meaningful leads, he'd used official channels to isolate her from the investigation. Danny hung up and walked through her apartment, gathering the essentials for an extended absence: clothing, cash, her personal weapon, and the micro cassette containing Mark's final testimony. Everything else could be replaced or abandoned. Danny turned off her apartment lights and slipped out through the back exit, carrying her investigation into the El Paso night, where shadows provided cover, and truth was a dangerous commodity that could get government agents branded as rogues or buried in unmarked graves. The hunt for Mark Vega's killer had become a hunt for her own survival. The motel room smelled like industrial disinfectant and cigarette smoke, its thin walls offering little privacy and less comfort. She spread the case files and evidence photographs across the room's single table, creating a timeline of the events that had led to Mark's disappearance. Who was the federal agent Gil Tanner had seen crossing into Mexico with? Diplomatic immunity. Danny opened her laptop and accessed the DEA personnel database through her federal credentials, hoping Morrison hadn't yet suspended her access to official systems. Badge number 4517 would be listed somewhere in the federal registry, along with the name of the agent who'd authorized Mark's car to cross into Mexico. The search results appeared on her screen. Badge number issued to Deputy Director James Morrison. The revelation hit her like a freight train. The man who'd warned her about stirring up old ghosts was the ghost she'd been hunting. Morrison had been part of Operation Code Phoenix. He'd crossed into Mexico 2 days after Mark disappeared, using diplomatic immunity to transport evidence across international borders. He'd spent 8 years in position to control any investigation into Mark's death, classifying files and restricting access to protect his own involvement in federal corruption. And now he was using his authority to shut down her investigation before she could expose his role in Mark's murder. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Room 247 Sunset Motel. You have 30 minutes. Danny's blood turned to ice. She grabbed her service weapon from the nightstand and moved to the window, checking the parking lot for signs of federal vehicles or surveillance teams. The lot appeared normal, but normal could be an illusion when federal agents were involved. A soft knock at her door made her decision. She gathered her files and evidence, stuffing everything into her go bag while keeping her weapon ready. If Morrison had tracked her to the motel, she needed to be gone before official vehicles surrounded the building. She opened the door with the chain still attached and found herself looking at Marisol Vega. Don't shoot, Marisol said calmly. We need to talk. Danny removed the chain and let her in, checking the parking lot one more time before closing the door. "How did you find me? I followed you from the coffee shop. I'm sorry, but I had to make sure you were serious about finding Mark's killer, and not just another one of his enforcers." "Who are you talking about?" "Morrison. What else do you know about Morrison's operation?" "Mark wasn't his first victim. There have been others." Mari Saul pulled a folder from her purse and placed it on the table. Beside the evidence files inside were newspaper clippings, obituaries, and missing person reports. Dating back to 1991, DEA agent Carlos Mendez disappeared during an undercover operation in 1993. Agent Sarah Kim killed in a car accident while investigating border corruption in 1994. Agent Michael Torres found dead in the desert after reporting irregularities in federal drug seizures. Danny studied the collection of documents recognizing the pattern of federal agents who died or disappeared while investigating. Corruption in border operations. You think Morrison killed all of them? I think Morrison has been eliminating anyone who threatened his operation. Mark was just the most recent casualty in a campaign to protect federal corruption. Danny's phone rang. Morrison's direct line appeared on the caller ID answer. Marisol whispered, "Act normal. We can't let him know you figured out his involvement." Danny accepted the call, keeping her voice steady. Agent Rice. "Danny, I need you to come in immediately. There's been a development in the Vega case that requires your immediate attention." "What kind of development?" "We've identified the person responsible for Agent Vega's death, but the arrest needs to be coordinated carefully to avoid compromising related operations." "How soon can you be here?" Morrison's voice carried the smooth authority of someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question, but Danny could hear something else underneath urgency, perhaps even desperation. "I'll be there within the hour." "Good. And Danny, come alone. This information is extremely sensitive." The line went dead. Danny looked at Marisol, who'd been following the conversation with growing alarm. "He's trying to lure you back to the federal building. If you go, you'll disappear just like Mark did. Then we need to force Morrison into the open, make him expose himself before he can eliminate another federal agent." Danny gathered her evidence files and Mark's cassette recording. "Do you trust me with my life, with my daughter's future, with the truth about my husband's murder? Then help me set a trap for the man who killed him." The federal building's parking garage felt like a tomb at midnight, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows between concrete pillars. Danny parked her sedan in the visitor section and sat for a moment, checking her weapon and the wire recording device hidden beneath her jacket. She needed him on record, confessing to his crimes, before she could expose the conspiracy that had protected him for 8 years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marisol FBI team. "In position, be careful after leaving the motel." Danny had made one stop, the El Paso FBI field office, where Special Agent Rebecca Brown had listened to Mark's cassette recording. With growing alarm, federal agents murdering other federal agents to protect trafficking operations, cross-jurisdictional lines that demanded bureau attention. "If Morrison's been eliminating DEA agents since the early 90s, we have probable cause to arrest him for federal conspiracy charges," Agent Brown had said. "But we need him to incriminate himself, a confession, recorded testimony, something that proves his involvement beyond circumstantial evidence." Morrison's office lights were on and his door stood partially open. Danny knocked and entered without waiting for permission, noting that he'd positioned himself behind his desk with clear sightlines to all exits. His jacket hung on a chair beside him, probably concealing a service weapon. "Agent Reich, thank you for coming in so late. Please sit down." Danny remained standing, keeping her hands visible in her position near the door. "You said there was a development in the Vega case." "Indeed, we've identified the person responsible for Mark's death. His name was Roberto Sandoval, a mechanic from Juarez who was working with cartel elements to eliminate federal agents investigating trafficking operations." Morrison's explanation was smooth practice designed to close the case while protecting his own involvement. But Danny had heard Mark's final testimony, knew that Sandoval had been the witness, not the killer. That's interesting, Director, because according to the evidence, Sandoval was Mark's informant, not his killer. Something shifted in Morrison's expression, a careful recalibration, as he realized she knew more than he'd expected. "I'm not sure where you got that information, Agent Reich, but I can assure you it's incorrect. Sandoval was a cartel operative who died in Mark's car after providing testimony about federal agents involved in trafficking operations." Danny watched Morrison's face as she revealed what she knew. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his casual demeanor replaced by something harder. Agent Reich, you seem to have developed some very specific theories about Agent Vega's disappearance, theories that could be problematic if they were to become public problematic, for ongoing federal operations for the safety of other agents working in similar capacities. Some secrets are more important than individual justice. Danny felt the recording device against her chest, capturing every word of Morrison's careful threats. What if those secrets involve federal agents murdering other federal agents to protect their own criminal operations? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Morrison studied her for a long moment, and Danny could see him calculating options, weighing risks, deciding how far he was willing to go to protect his conspiracy agent. Reich, I think you've misunderstood the nature of this investigation. Mark Vega wasn't murdered by federal agents. He was killed trying to protect federal operations from cartel infiltration. Then explain how his car ended up buried in the desert. Explain why Roberto Sandoval's blood was found in the vehicle. Explain why you crossed into Mexico with diplomatic immunity. 2 days after Mark disappeared, Morrison's carefully constructed facade finally broke his hand, moved toward his jacket with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to eliminating threats. You've been conducting an unauthorized investigation. Agent Reich, accessing classified materials, interviewing protected witnesses, compromising ongoing federal operations that makes you a threat to national security, and threats to national security have a way of disappearing, don't they? Danny kept her voice steady while calculating distances to cover and escape routes, just like Mark Vega disappeared, just like Carlos Mendes, Sarah Kim, and Michael Torres Morrison's weapon cleared his jacket as he stood behind his desk. Those agents died in the line of duty protecting operations. They were honor-bound to defend. Sometimes good agents have to make difficult choices to serve the greater good, or Morrison's good. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Agent Reich, the networks, we've built, the intelligence we've gathered, the operations we've protected. They're worth more than individual lives, more than individual careers, more than your misguided investigation. Morrison raised his weapon, and Danny threw herself sideways as the first shot shattered the window behind where she'd been standing. Glass cascaded to the floor as she drew her own service weapon and returned fire, the sound echoing through the empty federal building like thunder. FBI, drop your weapon. Special Agent Brown and her team burst through Morrison's office door as he fired a second shot that punched through the drywall near Danny's head. Morrison turned his weapon toward the FBI agents, but before he could fire, a non-lethal round from Agent Brown's tactical shotgun struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol skittering across the floor. Federal agents, drop your weapon. Morrison collapsed behind his desk, clutching his wounded shoulder, but very much alive. FBI agents swarmed into the office, securing the scene, while the paramedics attended to his injury. Agent Reich, are you injured? Agent Brown called out. Danny remained pressed against the wall, her weapon still trained on Morrison's. Position, I'm fine. Did the recording device capture everything? Agent Brown nodded grimly. Every word. Morrison threatened to eliminate you and mentioned his operations. That's enough to start unraveling his network, but we need him alive to get the full picture as paramedics stabilized Morrison's shoulder wound. He glared at Danny with the hatred of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. This isn't over, Agent Reich. You have no idea how deep this goes, actually. I think we're about to find out exactly how deep it goes. Marisol Vega stood in the federal building lobby surrounded by FBI agents and crime scene technicians, but somehow separate from the controlled chaos of a federal investigation concluded in violence when she saw Danny approaching her. Composed exterior finally cracked. It's over. It's over. We got him. Marisol nodded, tears streaming down her face for the first time in 8 years. Thank you for believing Mark was innocent, for finding the truth, for making sure his sacrifice meant something. The interrogation room in the federal courthouse had no windows, no softening influences, just harsh fluorescent lighting that turned Morrison's bandaged form pale and hollow. He sat across from Danny and FBI Special Agent Brown, his wounded shoulder immobilized in a sling. Director, Morrison, we recovered this from your personal office. Safe Agent. Brown placed a micro recorder on the table. This contains recordings of your conversations with cartel representatives. Morrison's face went rigid as he stared at the device. Agent Brown pressed play. Morrison's voice filled the room. Cold and businesslike Agent Vega is becoming a problem. He's asking questions about our financial arrangements. We need a permanent solution. The recording continued. I want it to look like cartel violence. No connection back to federal. Operations Agent Brown played the second recording. Morrison's voice authorizing the elimination of Agent Patricia Hendricks. She's building a corruption case that threatens everything we've built. Eliminate her and make it disappear. Then a third recording about Roberto Sanchez, another bleeding heart who doesn't understand operational realities. He dies tonight. Morrison's hands remained steady as the recordings played his expression, showing no surprise or denial. When the final recording ended, he looked up calmly. Well, he said with cold attachment, I suppose my operational security wasn't as thorough as I thought. Agent Brown leaned forward. So you admit to ordering the deaths of 11 federal agents. I admit to managing a highly profitable operation that required eliminating threats to its security. Morrison's tone was matter-of-fact, completely devoid of remorse. Agent Vega and the others were compromising arrangements that generated millions in revenue you were taking. Cartel money, Morrison met dies. Gaze without flinching, it was an efficient business model. You murdered federal agents for money. I eliminated personnel who threatened operational continuity. Agent Vega discovered the financial arrangements and planned to expose everything to internal affairs. Morrison's voice carried the casual tone of someone discussing routine paperwork. His death was a necessary business decision. Danny felt sick listening to his complete lack of remorse. Where did you bury him? Morrison answered immediately, as if he had been expecting the question, about 2 mi north of the Candelaria facility. He paused. He fought back, by the way. Killed Martinez before Santos and Ruiz finally put him down. You watched them murder him. I coordinated necessary security measures. Agent Reich, your mentor, threatened to destroy an operation that took years to build his elimination, preserved millions in revenue, and maintained valuable relationships following Morrison's coordinates. Danny led a federal recovery team to mark Vega's burial site. The excavation confirmed Morrison's confession and recovered the remains of Vega and other federal agents who died fighting corruption within his own agency. Dr. Sarah Mahon examined the evidence. Agent Vega was shot 3 times, but only after significant defensive trauma. The forensics support Morrison's account. He fought his attackers before being killed. Morrison's confession led to 37 additional arrests across multiple agencies, exposing a corruption network that had operated for nearly a decade. The federal courthouse in El Paso had never seen a trial like the United States versus Morrison. 3 months of testimony revealed the scope of a conspiracy that had corrupted federal law enforcement for 30 years, eliminating agents who discovered the truth and protecting officials who'd profited from border trafficking operations. Danny sat in the witness gallery watching as Morrison received 11 consecutive life sentences for the murders of federal agents. The judge's voice carried the weight. A federal authority finally turned toward justice rather than protection of institutional secrets. The court finds that the defendant systematically abused his position of trust to order the elimination of federal agents who threatened to expose his criminal conspiracy. These were not actions taken to protect national security, but murders committed to protect personal profit and institutional corruption. In the gallery, behind her, Marisolva Vega held her daughter's hand as they listened to the judge pronounce justice for Mark's murder. Maria was 16 now, old enough to understand that her father had died fighting corruption within the federal government, old enough to take pride in his sacrifice. But the most powerful testimony had come from Mark himself, the micro-cassette recording that proved he died, trying to expose the very conspiracy that had finally been brought to justice. After the sentencing, Danny walked with Marisol and Maria to the federal building where a memorial service was being held. Special Agent Mark Anthony Vega killed in the line of duty while investigating federal corruption that threatened the integrity of law enforcement operations, and Marisol wiped tears from her eyes as Mark's name was added to the memorial wall that honored federal agents who died in service to their country. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief that her husband's true story could finally be told. He would have been proud, she whispered to Danny. Proud that he played a role in taking down the corruption he'd fought against, proud that other families finally have answers about their loved ones. As the ceremony ended, Danny found herself alone with the memorial wall, studying the names of agents who died because they'd been too honest, too dedicated, too willing to fight corruption wherever they found it. Mark's badge was mounted beside his name, the same badge that had been found in his buried car, tarnished but unbroken after 8 years underground. It gleamed under the federal building's lights like a promise that justice, however delayed, would eventually be served. Agent Reich, the DEA has offered you a promotion to Deputy Director with responsibility for overseeing the reforms that will prevent future corruption. They want someone with unquestioned integrity to rebuild trust in federal law enforcement. Danny looked around the federal building where she'd fought to expose the truth about Mark's death, where she'd nearly been killed by the corruption she'd uncovered, where justice had finally been served after 3 decades of institutional failure. "I'll think about it." She left the federal building and drove to the cemetery where Mark had finally been buried. Marisol and Maria were there, placing fresh flowers on the grave. They'd finally been able to mourn Mark properly, knowing the truth about his death, and taking pride in his sacrifice. Agent Reich, Maria said as Danny approached, "Thank you for finding out what really happened to my father. Thank you for making sure people know he was one of the good guys." Danny knelt beside the grave and placed her own offering on the headstone, her DEA badge, the symbol of federal authority that Mark had taught her to wear with honor and integrity. "It's not a resignation," she told Marisol. "It's a promise that his sacrifice will continue to inspire agents who remember that the badge means something, that federal law enforcement serves justice, not personal profit, that good agents don't disappear when they discover corruption. They expose it no matter the cost." The El Paso sun was setting as they left the cemetery, painting the Franklin Mountains in shades of gold and purple. Mark Vega's story had ended where it began, with a federal agent fighting for truth in a border country where secrets and lies had flourished in the shadows between 2 nations, and that in the end the good guys had won. Thanks for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.